Well, hello! I talked in September last year about the UK government's drone consultation document and encouraged everybody to respond to it so we could get our voices heard. Well, the government has now published its response to that consultation, and this morning I sat down and read through all 68 pages of it so we can talk about what has changed, how it affects us model flyers, and what might be happening next. But before we get into it, a quick reminder to please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't, and click that little bell icon to find out when I'm uploading content. Well done to around 5,000 or so of you that have managed to complete the consultation document. It wasn't easy going and there was some vague and weird stuff, especially the bits on commercial drone modelling. Anyway, the important pieces of the response are this. First off, registration. The biggie in this document is that it does confirm that registration for any pilot flying a drone of 250 grams to 20 kilograms will need to be registered, and you'll have to pass some sort of online competency test. And that comes into effect on the 30th of November this year, 2019. What it doesn't do is go into any detail here, which is fairly annoying. But reading around some of their statements, it seems that the pilot themselves will be the one that's going to be registered, rather than having to register every single model you have. But some sort of registration number is going to need to be affixed to each one of your models when it's flown to identify that you are the registered owner or flyer. Again, what the size of this label is going to be, or the font or material where you can print it yourself, where you need some official thing, isn't discussed at all. And there's no indication of what this will cost us. I'm assuming it's going to cost us because people would whine if they were paying their regular taxes to let us play around with models. So after yesterday's video that I uploaded talking about Gatwick, I briefly touched on this document, and I saw a whole load of people making comments about either saying there's no way I'm going to register, or I'm going underground, or even like I'm selling up. What's your take on this? I'm really interested to know if people would register, or they're going to sort of brave it and go rogue. Go underground, or metaphorically speaking anyway. Perhaps you could write down a comment below, and perhaps I'll put up a post on YouTube so I can put a proper poll. Be good to get a handle on the general feeling from people. If you want to check out the entire document, it's linked down below, but there's thankfully no real reason to read the whole lot. It's helpfully summarised in the first few pages, but if you do read the whole thing, further down at the end as the responses they've got on each question, or a flavour of the response if they've sort of bundled them together. One interesting thing about registration and fixing something to your aircraft is that scale modelers complain that it would ruin the look of their models if they've got some big weird number on it that didn't fit into the scale thing, which I thought was an interesting point of view. It's true, of course. I don't know what you can do about it. Usefully in the document, they do define what a drone is. It is a small unmanned aircraft, but isn't a kite or a balloon. So it pretty much covers everything. Everything we fly, at least as modelers. Frustratingly though, during the document, they also talk about model aircraft in a different way. It's normally in response to people that belong to organisations like the BMFA arguing that model flyers already have a great safety record and also have their own testing, and so should be exempt from any registration or test. The response document hasn't settled on what exemptions, if any, these flying organisations should have. And it's not just BFMA, it's FPV UK and a bunch of others as well. What they have done is ruled out a pure exemption to registration and competency testing, so I'm afraid we're not going to get away with that. The CAA exemptions that allow us to fly to 1,000 feet, whether using FPV or not, if you're a member of one of the listed organisations, are still in place. Although, to remind you, this does exclude multi-rotors or a plane with an autopilot that can do more than just stabilise. Quite why they wouldn't want to return to home system is beyond me still. The other big news is the extension to the Aerodrome exclusion limit. It was 1 kilometre, but in the response document there were several airlines and airports who commented that the approach path meant they could be under 400 feet when they were 1 kilometre out, and so they could risk hitting a drone or some sort of collision there. So this has been extended two ways. First off, there's a 5k limit around the aerodrome itself, but there's also a 5k limit extending out of the end of the runways, which is 1 kilometre long, which gives you sort of a weird circle with lines coming out. Here's a picture. It makes more sense when you see it that way. It is quite a distance though, and I know just looking on Facebook today around Southampton Airport where I am, some guys commenting that how are we going to fly at Southampton Common if it's now within that 5 kilometre zone. And you can still apply to the air traffic controllers and say we'd like to fly in this zone, here's why, and I suppose you could say things like we're not going to be above the tree level or we're going to be below this height. I don't know how accommodating air traffic controllers are. It seems like a reasonable case to put forward. There was also talk in the document about perhaps having permanent exemption locations, just like a park where people might fly anyway. There will be no minimum age limit for someone to fly or own a drone. That was one of the things put forward, but now the government thinks we misunderstood the question. They were basically putting it out there that they wanted someone over the age of 18 to be the drone owner, so the legal responsibility would fall on them. They weren't trying to impose an actual age restriction on the pilot. No, we understood that, we just didn't like it. Police powers. Now, I had a really big moan about this one previously, and I wrote in my response over and over again about it. I thought the new powers they were suggesting were far too overbearing, and they already had the necessary powers in place to seize equipment or search your premises with the warrant. And if you look at the couple that got accused of the Gatwick drone flying, they certainly had stuff seized and their house turned over. It's actually acknowledged within the response document that this is really a duplication of existing powers that the police do have, but they wanted it anyway to make a drone-specific law. So the police powers are coming in. They will have the power to ask to see your registration and some sort of proof of competency exam. Not that we know what those are going to take. But the rest is a bit fuzzy about when police have a reasonable suspicion, which is a very subjective term. At this point, if they have a reasonable suspicion that you're being illegal or you're causing a problem, they can ask you to land, they can demand your personal details, they can see your drone or any data contained on it, and a whole bunch of other things. They'll still need a warrant to search your house, but again, that woolly reasonable suspicion of a drone being in the house and it may have committed some sort of offence is a worry. Now, there was a lot of valid feedback from people, as you'd expect, about saying, well, how can the police possibly look in the sky and say, oh, you're at 410 feet and that's illegal, bring it down now, I'm going to have it. How possibly can they do that? How do they know it's the wrong way? Are they going to carry scales? And what if they asked you to land but it's dangerous to do so at the time? Who takes responsibility for what might happen? All this stuff really hasn't been addressed, with the only sort of note saying the police will need some training. Well, yeah, duh. Fixed penalty notices are a go. They're going to come in. So the police will be able to give you an on-the-spot fine if they say, show me your registration. You say, I'm not registered. Again, I guess that'll have the scales with them to decide if your drone is over 250 grams and so it needs to be registered. I'm more worried about the case of where it's causing a nuisance to people or comes under public order, which is, again, a very subjective term depending on someone's point of view. What if I'm flying perfectly legally in the space and then someone enters that space and decides to take objection that they don't want a drone in the area that they've entered? It's kind of like, well, I was here first. Does their right to not have a drone flying around trump mine where I was already there flying perfectly legally? I don't know. It's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? I feel the police aren't really equipped to police this, if I'm honest. Now, there was a section on product standards, and these are where we're getting into the sort of less decided ones. And this talked about geofencing as a requirement and proposals to require all new drones on the market from 2022 to be electronically conspicuous. That is, that other aircraft would be able to see them on some sort of system. I guess there's some sort of tag that shows what it is, as opposed to just a radar thing, which it should show on anyway. Again, we lack detail here. It talks about geofencing, but we have to assume that's on a consumer-based drone where that sort of thing's possible. If you pick up the average race drone or model aircraft, then it's not possible, and I can't believe they're expecting us to retrofit these onto tiny little quads or planes that really aren't designed for this sort of thing. And it's the same with this electronic conspicuousness. New drones on the market, it's like, well, it doesn't cater for people building their own and buying components, so we'll have to assume this is the DJI style consumer aerial drone, we hope. So they just mentioned they're working with manufacturers as it goes, and I guess we'll hear more about that when it comes. Some good news is that the FIN stuff, this is the Flight Information Notification System, is out of the plan for now. This was the idea that you'd have to register your flight plan or the fact you were going to fly in a location on some sort of electric system, so other air traffic would know that you were doing this, and it was somehow going to link into things. This was overwhelming sort of conclusion from everybody that read it, that this was just unworkable. You can't plan these sort of flights. What if you can't get the detail on your phone? What if you're literally just flying around in the same location again and again at a very low height? It's all very useless. You can kind of see where they're coming from. If you're going to do a flight that's high and long over a certain area, then people would need to know about it. But bearing in mind, we're talking about all the other things are there to say, well, we're not going to go above 400 feet, we're not going out of line of sight. Why would we ever need to file a flight plan to say, hey, there's a drone here where your aircraft is never going to come, so why do we need it? Anyway, it's out for now, but they're still looking at the ESA standards and what the rest of Europe does in order to think of bringing this in later. It then had some sections about counter-drone measures, and it was mainly about questioning who should have these and how should we test them. And of course, lots of people got worried that any testing, when you're talking about RF jammers, could have an effect on things that are close by. It's like, well, what happens if I'm flying something which doesn't have any sort of autopilot? It's just going to crash and stuff like that. But it was kind of a weird question, and they saw that the responses were kind of confused. And it was much the same about this commercial drone modelling, in which they basically said, how many drones do you own now? How many do you own in a year? How many do you own in 5 years? Expecting to be able to generate this curve to say how many drones there will be out there. Generally speaking, people don't just add and add and add to their drones if they're commercial drone flyers. They're going to say, I've got this and this, and then I might replace that with this new one that comes along. The whole idea of that one is really weird, and they kind of, again, saw a lot of confused responses in that. Now, I read through all the responses and how they put them together, and there was a sort of, you could call it like a mix of several things. There were responses from people who had never owned a drone and didn't own a drone, and they're always the harshest ones. They're like, if you can't log something on fins, you shouldn't fly, and drones should be banned in general and never fly in parks, and the exclusion area should be massive, and no one should be allowed them. They were the sort of hardliners. There were the normal drone pilots that were quite sort of measured in their responses and pointing out the flaws in what the document was saying. And then there were the club organisations that were generally trying to protect their existing membership and saying we should be exempt from everything because we are the BFMA or whoever it was. So the general subtext of the document here is a bit sort of worrying. I suppose we saw it coming. The government seems to think there is a drone, and this drone looks a bit like a DJI Phantom. It is your standard camera drone. You fly up, you take pictures, you take video, you hover it about. It doesn't really understand what else is out there and what the different control methods are. It just assumes that one rule will fit everything, which of course isn't the case. Because of the amount of shouty voices from the sort of the club flyers, they've established that there's these model aircraft people, but they're still trying to make this one rule that fits perfectly in a sort of Phantom type to fit everything, which doesn't necessarily work like that, and people fly things completely differently, and they haven't really grabbed hold of that idea yet. I also find there's a bit of an underlying tone of them sort of having, well, you've had your say, but we're going to do what we said we're going to do anyway. Even where there's a concession to say, okay, that's not working, like fins and the age restriction, they haven't dropped it entirely. They're just going to say, you misunderstood our question, we'll come back to it later. Which is, you know, not great. You kind of feel like they're just going to put it through in the end in some way anyway. But that's it. So it's not all bad. I mean, registration, let me know what you think about it, and some of the airport zones. Although, you know, I want to be safe. I don't want to be anywhere near a plane when it's coming down. Hopefully they'll see some sense in where you've already got established flying spots that fall in that 5 kilometre exclusion zone. and the police is aware. But let's see how the rest of it turns out. As soon as I know any more about the form registration may take in this competency test, I'll of course do something in another video. But until that time, I hope you get out there and fly while you can. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next one. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.